Now I'd like to introduce our guest speaker today is Myron Orfield. He is a professor at the University of Minnesota Law School and one of the country's foremost authorities on metropolitan governance. Professor Orfield directs the Institute on Metropolitan Opportunity, working with leading environmental and criminal justice law faculty. He is a former member of the Minnesota State Minnesota Senate, and he co-authored Minnesota's Metropolitan Reorganization Act of 1994, which transformed the Twin Cities Metropolitan Council into the nation's most powerful regional government. As you know, we have been hosting speakers that will help us start thinking about the future as we prepare the work of our next long-range transportation plan. Today, Professor Orfield is going to talk about the challenges and opportunities of growing racial diversity in the suburbs of northern New Jersey. And Professor Orfield, it's all yours.
Thank you very much. Sounds like everybody can hear me pretty well from the feedback from the loudspeaker. I appreciate the opportunity to come here. I'm going to talk today about, I think, a really important topic about the changing nature of America. We all know that 80% of our country live in large metropolitan areas of more than 50,000 people. We are a metropolitan nation. Most of the first world countries are metropolitan nations. We have very complex local government systems. I was official in local government for many years, for 15 years in the municipal legislature and local government. I was a land use lawyer. I used to work on regional plans and zoning plans and all sorts of things. I worked for developers. I've been active in New Jersey. I went to school in New Jersey at Princeton. I worked on many cases here involving the Mount Laurel case. So I've had a little bit of background in New Jersey. I've been a New Jerseyite for a while. And I want to talk today about a topic I think that is an unaddressed topic in America. It's a very important topic in America. It's very important for the suburbs of America. America is a suburban country. It's about racial diversity in the suburbs, the patterns of racial diversity in the suburbs, the fact that continuing ongoing discrimination in the suburbs, things like steering, mortgage lending discrimination, exclusionary zoning, the way that school district boundaries are drawn, not only hurts non-white New Jerseyites, but has devastating effects for the older and more fully developed suburbs. Not only hurts people, but it hurts communities. I'm going to talk about this pattern in New Jersey, some of the implications of it, how it fits into some challenges that are ongoing in the state courts, and then I'd be happy to answer questions. One of the things, this is a map, I hope you can see it well. This is a map that shows the various parts of New Jersey. You see northern New Jersey over on the far right side. You can see the Philadelphia metropolitan area, the state as a whole, the Trenton area in an inset. I've given you this slide presentation so you can take a look at it at your leisure. But what this is it's about racially diverse neighborhoods, and I'm going to show you a pattern over time. The areas that are predominantly non-white, which is more than in our measure, more than 60% non-white, are red. Highly diverse areas in our measure are between 20 and 40% non-white. Mildly diverse, highly diverse areas, moderately diverse are 20 to 40, highly diverse are 40 to 60. And so this is 1990, and you can see pockets of non-white poverty. A lot of times it's associated with poverty. I'll show you those statistics. And you can see a moderate amount of diversity in places like Pennsauken and some of the communities in northern New Jersey. You can see particularly along the river, and you can see Patterson, Teaneck. This is 1990. Now, move ahead a few years. This is 2000. So you can see this pattern of racially diverse suburbs really growing. The green areas particularly, these are moderately diverse places, between 20 and 40% non-white in terms of the population as a whole. This is in lots of ways. You can see by the year 2000, the suburbs, a lot of the big suburban areas had changed a lot. They'd become very diverse. We think of America, a lot of times we think it's of a monoculture of non-white cities, poor non-white cities, and white suburban areas, and that's really not true. We did a study about 5 years ago that showed that there are twice as many people in the United States that live in suburbs that are between 20 and 60% non-white as live in suburbs that are more than 60% white. So what we call the racially diverse suburbs, between 20 and 60% white, have twice as many members of the legislature in New Jersey, have twice as many members nationally, have twice as many members of Congress. They're very powerful places. They're not particularly unified in the way that they think about policy, but they're the dominant type of suburb in the United States. That's very different than a lot of our preconceptions. Now, this is 2000. Let's take a look at 2010. Much bigger area, just a gigantic change. I'm a demographer, a law professor, pointy head. I look at these numbers and they are stunning to me how fast America is changing. America is a multiracial nation. It's the most diverse country, the most diverse modern country in the world. A few years ago, there was no majority in terms of children born in the country. By 2040, there will be no racial majority in the country. We'll have lots of white people, we'll have lots of Latino people, we'll have lots of black people, we'll have lots of Asian people, but nobody's going to be a numerical majority. We're going to be a multiracial nation, if we're not already. We really are, compared to Europe and many of the other first world countries. And you can see this in the suburbs. Now, there's a lot of opportunity here, and there's a lot of challenges here. One of the things we know is that in these racially diverse suburbs, racial disparities are much smaller than they are in any place else in New Jersey. So if you look at the achievement gap in the schools in these racially diverse suburbs between black and white kids, it's the smallest anywhere in the state. If you look at racial attitudes in places like this, they're better than they are in other parts of the state. People get along better. It may not seem that way, may not feel that way on a day-to-day basis. A lot of times interracial contact is bumpy and bad, but surveys, data show that people get along better and they have better views of each other. Black people have more open and accepting views of whites, whites of blacks of Latinos, et cetera, et cetera. People who live in the same space, they tend to get along better and understand each other a little bit better. There's a lot of social mobility in these places, both for white and black and Latino New Jerseyites. These are the places, these diverse suburbs, that have the highest economic mobility and the chances of going to college and improving life opportunities. That's the good news. They tend to be really well-run places, by and large. They tend to operate with good tax rates and good services. They tend to do a good job. They tend to do what America wants of government. They tend to be bipartisan. They're a mixture of politics. That's the good news. The bad news is that they don't stay diverse in New Jersey very long. Because of the forces of racial steering, because real estate agents at a certain point stop showing white families some of these suburbs, because of mortgage lending discrimination, because the inability of black and Latino households to access prime low-interest credit. Black and Latino families in New Jersey, as they move into the suburbs, have many different choices than whites of similar education, income, and credit history. And that has a tendency to cause tipping and resegregation. And resegregation is a devastating thing. It's a devastating thing for individuals who lose their equity. It's a devastating thing for municipal government. When a municipal government moves from diverse to resegregated, it loses its fiscal capacity generally. There's a higher correlation between race and fiscal capacity in the United States than there is between income. When places become non-white, when real estate agents stop showing houses, when mortgage lenders tightened up, local government finances get in big trouble. And projects become, tax rates go up to chase a declining level of services. It's hard to relocate, it's hard to compete as the fiscal base declines. So the good news is these are places where these diverse suburbs, America's a lot more integrated in these suburbs than it ever has been before. In these places, people tend to be getting along pretty darn well, better than they have before. It's not perfect. I'm not trying to oversell this. That's the good news. This is the kind of place I think Martin Luther King and many of the reformers envisioned as a beloved community in the 1960s. That's the good news. The bad news is because of relentless driving discrimination, these communities are likely going to go through a cycle of becoming disinvested so that people with means can move to newer, different types of whiter enclaves, either in central cities or different suburbs. So this is a pattern in 2010, 2017, even more. Now, in New Jersey, the patterns of resegregation are are faster than almost any place in the country. You can take a look at an article I published in 2012 in Housing Policy Debate. And the suburbs go through racial change here really fast, twice as fast almost as the national average. Yeah. Chicago suburbs have rates like this too, Chicago South Side suburbs. So they're quick cycles. And in New Jersey, there's low thresholds. So when you see communities become about 24% non-white, you see pretty heavy levels of steering and mortgage lending discrimination. And this is, again, not only something that hurts individuals, but it changes the basic nature of that community's economy. And because you're not dealing with things like this, because you're not dealing with steering, because you're not dealing with mortgage lending discrimination, because you're not addressing these things, you're going to have really literally dozens of communities, dozens of suburbs in the second and third ring that undergo fast racial transitions and become very different places than they were a decade ago. This correlation and about change, it just shows these are some graphs and charts. I have a public paper coming out about this, but it shows that from very low thresholds in New Jersey, tipping happens really fast. It happens really much faster than the rest of the country. One of the reasons New Jersey ends up being very segregated is not only because of its central cities, but also because of the ways that suburbs go through transition really fast. So the segregation in New Jersey is not just the cities and the suburbs, but it's between the suburbs. A lot of the things that happened in Newark and Camden in the 1960s are written up by Philip Roth in his many novels about these communities. These same kinds of transitions are happening in literally dozens of inner ring, second ring suburbs, really fast change. Characteristics of diverse suburbs. These are racially diverse places by municipality in 2017. Again, you're just looking at municipalities as a whole. You can see where they are in these maps. Distribution across income types, you can see 2000. If you take a look at this map, predominantly white suburbs in 2000 were 42% of the population in New Jersey. 17 years later, the predominantly white suburbs are 17% of the population in New Jersey. So that's a big change. If you think about the suburb, 41% in 2000, 21% in 2017. Moderately diverse suburbs, between 20 and 40%, or 29%, 21 to 29%. So about the same, a little bit bigger. The problem is a lot of those moderately diverse suburbs in 2000 are no longer moderately diverse. They're predominantly non-white, or they're highly diverse. You can see the predominantly non-white suburbs went from 10 to 18% of the population in New Jersey. The predominantly non-white suburbs are larger in population than the central cities of New Jersey. The predominantly non-white suburbs are poorer fiscally, per capita, per household. They have a lower fiscal capacity than some of the central cities. Not all of them. Some of the central cities in New Jersey, like Camden and so forth, don't have much money per capita. Anyway, you can see the change. Now, if you take a look at the median income in the central cities, jobs per household, that's the top bar. You can see the predominantly non-white suburbs, a little bit higher income in New Jersey. Jobs per resident is lower than central cities. You can take a look at poverty rate. It's lower. Tax capacity is higher at the moment, but over time, there's going to be an equalizing effect in that. Highly diverse suburbs, median income at 98% of the average, high level of jobs, tax capacity at 78. Moderately diverse suburbs, again, these are the ones that are between 20 and 40, 113% of the median income, 28% of the jobs per residence. They're not necessarily really job-rich places. Low poverty rates, fiscal capacity, 99%. Predominantly white suburbs, you see very high median incomes, jobs of pretty strong capacity, pretty good jobs, not a big job centers, probably residential communities more, kind of like the first-ring suburbs. Poverty rates very low, and you can see the fiscal capacity of the predominantly white suburbs very high. They have good tax bases. So what does it mean when you have a low tax capacity compared to a high tax capacity? I have to teach my students this in state and local finance. Tax capacity, they get kind of dizzy and bored and yawning when I start to talk about tax capacity. But what tax capacity is you take the rateables within the boundaries of a jurisdiction. You figure out what you can tax. And it's different in different states, but certainly property. Sometimes you have a local sales tax, sometimes you don't. other things, and you take that capacity and you apply to it a metropolitan average rate. You apply the average rate in the metropolitan area to the rateables. You don't apply the local rate because local rates vary. You apply the average metropolitan rate to the rateables. You divide it by the number of households. I like households because households demand services generally from municipalities as opposed to people. You take those rateables, you apply an average rate, you divide it by the number of households, and you get the fiscal power of the community, its ability to produce revenue at a given tax rate. Now, one of the things that's kind of bad about this change in New Jersey and the huge disparity, for economic development, these older places say, hey, middle-class people and businesses, please come here. We've got mostly poor schools. We can tax you at a pretty high rate, and we cannot spend very much on you. Whereas the newer, bluer, whiter places can say, hey, local governments, hey, middle-class families and businesses, please come here. We have low-poverty schools. We can tax you at a low rate and spend quite a bit on you. So you have this one group of places that says no matter how smart you are, whether Bill Gates is running the place or whether a very smart person is, if you've got a low tax capacity, you're going to have a comparatively high tax rate and comparatively low spending. If you have a high tax capacity, you're going to have a comparatively low tax rate and high spending. And most of us that have choices choose the best choice we can make. We mostly choose to live in the best places we can live that have the lowest tax rates and the best services. We mostly choose to live in the places that have the lowest poverty schools and have the greatest achievement. Now the problem is it's pretty hard to afford to live in those places, and only about 25% of the people do, and it becomes a complicated rate. And it becomes harder and harder for these redder places, the places that have become non-white and diverse and have lost their fiscal capacity to compete and regenerate themselves with all this competition. You can take a look at this is the suburbs and transition. It gives you a sense of what's happening there, groupings of them. I've talked about this already. School diversity, and I've showed you the maps of the adult population of the municipalities in New Jersey. Schools are even more diverse and even more complicated. A lot of times the school districts are twice as diverse as the communities are, particularly in a place like New Jersey where suburbs go through rapid change and don't stay integrated very well. This is a map that shows schools in 2000. Schools that are predominantly non-white, 402, highly diverse, 158, moderately diverse, 280, predominantly white, 628. So this is 2000, here's 2005, here's 2010, here's 2015. And again, you see tremendous change in the suburbs and the schools. And often when you see the local elementary schools change, you know a lot about what's going to happen to the community. You know what's going to happen to that housing market. You know when steering is commenced. You know when credit's going to tighten. Because when those elementary schools start to change fast, it's an early warning sign about what's going to happen. And you've got hundreds of them changing faster than almost any place in the country. And it's something to think about. It gives you a sense of, again, the very rapid change. Northern New Jersey districts, these are school districts that are the percentage of Black or Hispanic students. Black and Latino students tend to have the highest levels of discrimination, highest levels of segregation. Asian students, not so much. And so you can see the Northern New Jersey communities, a lot of them are more than 79% of the students are Black or Latino, many of the districts. And again, you can take a look at this. And then this is 2016 to 2017. These are test scores, and the test scores are a lot the same as the poverty rates and the non-white rates. In the United States, if you're Black and poor, if you're Latino and poor, 3/4 of poor Black and Latino kids in the suburbs go to schools that are more than 70% poor. If you're white and poor, 3/4 of poor white kids go to schools that are majority middle class. So Black and Latino kids almost always tend to go to high poverty schools. White poor kids tend to go to middle income schools, and that's partly because they have the chance and choice to find the nooks and crannies of affordable housing in better school districts. They tend not to experience the steering or discrimination or the other kinds of things that happen. So poverty and race are kind of linked together. School performance, again, is tightly correlated. So if you take a look at the poverty rate of a school district, you can figure out about 91% of it, 9.9% of its test scores. It's a really powerful predictor. So a lot of times real estate agents will give families, they're not supposed to do this, but a lot of times they'll give families the test scores of the local elementary schools. And if the real estate agents don't do it, you can find it on 54 websites that you want to look at. You can look at the test scores. And the test scores are the same as the poverty rates, are the same as the diversity rates. And those test scores, a lot of times people that are buying houses, people that have chances and choices are going to look at those things. And you can see it's one of the ways that these figures are reflected. These are correlations. Again, I've talked about how high the correlation is between test scores. It's 0.85. I said 0.91. In New Jersey, it's a little bit lower, but it's an incredibly powerful predictor. The income status of the school is an incredibly powerful predictor of the test scores. There's almost nothing that's even close. Now, New Jersey politics. Part of what's happening is the politics is bifurcating in New Jersey. And what you're seeing is in most of the predominantly white suburbs are one party's in charge, and most of the diverse suburbs there's another party in charge. So you don't have a lot of overlap. There's a little bit. But almost all the Democrats in the legislature represent racially diverse suburbs. Almost all the Republicans in the legislature represent predominantly white suburbs. So you have kind of a harsh division between those two. Again, New Jersey tends to be divided more on that line than in most parts of the country. You can take a look at the racially diverse suburbs here. The red ones are the racially diverse suburbs, and you can see that when I'm talking about racially diverse suburbs, you're talking about most of the suburbs of New Jersey. And the politics are almost uncannily matched. And that presents problems, I think, between the parties. There are not too many Republicans that represent racially diverse suburbs. There's not too many Democrats that represent predominantly white suburbs. It's really divided. And again, that's a challenge to think about this. Now, you've got a lot of basic measures. I've got too many statistics. You get a former state senator who's a law professor, they can talk much too long. And bore the daylights out of mostly everybody that's there. But what I want to say to you is you've got some mechanisms to think about this in New Jersey. You've got really strong mechanisms. You've got a Mount Laurel decision, which I teach local government law. And I know Mount Laurel is a controversial issue in New Jersey. I've been involved in some of the appeals there. I've worked for various different governors on these issues. I know it's an unpopular kind of thing among a lot of suburbs, but it says, that decision says that every community in New Jersey has a constitutional obligation to provide for their fair share of affordable housing, the present and prospective fair share. Now, most of the affordable housing in New Jersey that's being built in the suburbs is being built in the racially diverse suburbs. There's almost none being built in the predominantly white suburbs. That could help a lot with some of these issues. If Mount Laurel, which is building more than half of the units in the suburbs, if they were moving them out of the poorer suburbs and into the more affluent suburbs, that could make a difference in these trends. There's also a lawsuit that's going on right now. It's called Latino Action Network versus the state of New Jersey, and it's a lawsuit that is in the courts now in New Jersey, being brought by, I believe, two former justices of the New Jersey Supreme Court. Justice Stein is a very fundamental figure in this, and I can't remember the other justice's name. It could be Podhoretz, perhaps. I'm not sure. Anyway, both moderate Republicans that are bringing this case, and they're arguing that the segregated nature of the schools in New Jersey violates the segregation clause. New Jersey has a clause in its constitution that prohibits segregation. It also is arguing that the segregated nature of the schools in many of the suburbs violates the New Jersey's obligation to provide an adequate education to all the students of New Jersey. And there's very strong case law that supports the plaintiff's claim on this. Now, this lawsuit, I think almost certainly, I'm a law professor, I've studied these, I think it's almost certainly going to prevail. I think the New Jersey Supreme Court is almost certainly going to hold this present condition unconstitutional. The question is, what happens then? And what happens in the future? Now, you can tell you what's going to happen now if you don't do anything. I'm kind of showing you that pattern. You're going to have lots more poor, racially diverse suburbs. You're going to have lots more white suburbs. You're going to have lots more affluent suburbs. You're going to have lots more diverse suburbs. You're going to have lots more affluent suburbs. You're going to have lots more poor, racially diverse suburbs. non-white suburbs. You're going to have you're going to have population growth in newer, whiter places. You're going to have a big band of places that are undergoing disinvestment. That's what's going to happen. Now, what could happen? If a higher share of this affordable housing went to these whiter, newer suburbs, if you adopted a plan that created dozens, or maybe 50 or 60 or 70 magnet schools that were racially diverse and strong in the cities in the older suburbs, you could have an effect on these trends. You could start to stabilize them. You can take a look at Louisville, Kentucky, which is more racially diverse than New Jersey, and it's been stably integrated for 50 years now, and that's what they've worked on these things. Or Raleigh, Durham, North Carolina has been stably integrated with many more black and Latino people than you have for 50 years. And they've taken actions to do it, and they don't have this kind of rapid change in the suburbs. They don't have the kinds of disparities. They have a much higher general, more stable level of racial integration. They don't have super, super white places, and they don't have super, super poor cities. They have, everything's kind of more blended. And that's a challenge and a choice. It's a hard choice. It's a choice that deals with the fundamental challenges of America and the fundamental problems that America has to deal with, the issues of race and poverty. It's a hard thing to work on, but it's an important thing to work on in a multiracial metropolitan nation. I often say that the Mount Laurel decision is the most beautiful and sophisticated state court decision that's ever been decided by an American court. It hasn't been implemented as well as it ought to have been. As you can see, the track record, most of the suburban houses is going to the poor suburbs. But as a matter of law and a matter of constitutional vision, the idea that cities within a metropolitan area are interdependent with each other, that they owe obligations to one another, that metropolitan areas are the true units of growth and development, that the zoning power only goes so far. The zoning power must be exercised with the welfare of all the citizens of New Jersey in mind. These are very sweeping, powerful doctrinal statements that really no other state has followed. You also have a case that's very strongly situated before your courts now. There's almost no support for the case. They're almost certainly going to win. The question is, what happens when they win? Does something good happen, or does something bad happen? Do you get one magnet school or one little kind of remedial program, or do you fix the whole thing? You try to fix the whole thing. Think about school finance, think about land use planning, think about affordable housing, think about transit. You've got an opportunity right now. The court is going to say the present system is unconstitutional within a year or so. The question is, what's going to happen then? Now, one of the reasons I'm here is I love metropolitan planning organizations. I've written 3 books about metropolitan planning organizations. My favorite place to go. I like to listen to your agendas. I like you kind of people. I used to be one of you kind of people. I like everything about it. But I also think that places like this have a chance to make a difference in the future of New Jersey and the future of the country. Courts make decisions, but if they're not carried out by local officials with legislative strategies, they very often don't change anything. I've been a legislator, I've been a lawyer, I've been a civil rights lawyer, I've been a development lawyer, a corporate lawyer, and nothing happens unless local officials like you are in the driver's seat of the outcome. So one of the reasons I'm here is you're paying me a nice stipend to come, and I like to do that. Helps me pay my kids' college tuition. But another reason I'm here is I'd like to engage you to deal with these issues, to think about them, to use your intelligence and skill and power. There's a lot of power in this room. To make this work right, to use this opportunity to fix this problem. And you shouldn't feel bad about having it be so bad. It's pretty much bad everywhere in the United States. It's a little bit worse in New Jersey and Illinois than most places, but it's bad everywhere. And so what I'm not trying to tell you is I'm not trying to tell you that this is the worst state in the country, the most racist one, but it's got an opportunity now to change this pattern for New Jersey's future forever, and probably show the whole United States how to deal with these problems. So you've got a sophisticated land use system, you've got a metropolitan population, you've got a majority in the legislature that's already diverse. So you've got a big challenge in front of you. You could really do good work. You could also do nothing. And if you do nothing, what's going to happen is pretty clear. You're going to have a couple more rings of disinvested places. where the places that we grew up or the places that we sent our children to school are not going to be viable for our grandchildren or their children. And we're going to have to plan around them. We're going to have to think about them. We're going to have to write them off. We're going to have to think of them as lower value uses. We're going to have to think of them as a kind of a new America, a new part of America, a suburban part of America that nobody really planned for.
About single-family zoning and the housing and transportation affordability index and this concept.
Yes.
How much of that is a tool, just to bring this back to the transportation connection and the zoning connection?
Well, I mean, in some places of the country, we just wrote a report about gentrification in the 50 largest regions on our website. You could take a look at it. It was covered fairly extensively in the press. I mean, in some ways, gentrification in central cities is going to change the dynamic. You're going to have some pretty white neighborhoods that are emerging in Boston and Portland, Oregon, and Seattle. Not so much in New Jersey, though. I mean, if you take a look at our gentrification studies, we're not seeing big patterns here. But certainly in New York City, big patterns in New York City of gentrification, which are going to create some more and more affluent white spaces inside central cities. The big places in the country where we found this is really happening, Portland, Oregon, it's happening in incredible ways, changing not only neighborhoods, but the whole nature of their school system. Portland, Oregon is going from a school system that was half non-white to one that's only about 20% non-white, very fast. Seattle's having this pattern. Washington, D.C., huge changes, but not so much in New Jersey. And it could, I mean, part of the idea of having a less segregated society is having more middle-class people live in places like Camden and Newark and having more housing choices and some of the more affluent outer burbs. And in the long term, you'd want, you know, a lot of people don't like this, but I think gentrification is an important thing that has to happen in lots of central cities. You don't want to have a gentrification that creates no income diversity. You don't want to have a monoculture of super wealthy white people there, but you need some people, you need a variety of diversity in central cities because of the way that our economy works. We need to have people that have buying power in central cities. Not everybody can be poor in central cities. I mean, that's not going to work. It has never worked very well.
Hi, my name is Neil Weissman. I'm a cycling advocate, so I think you're going to see where my question is I know that New York City and Portland are both really going full bore on increasing their cycling networks. Part of the reason is it bridges transportation deserts, it's low-cost transportation, it's resilient. Would you like to comment something on the...
Yeah, no, I think cycling, I come from a city that's miserably cold and has one of the highest bike riding rates in the country, and it's because of good regional planning. It's because we have really good bike trails, and it's a really good option for people to commute. I commute in the winter to the University of Minnesota across a frozen tundra because it's a nice way to go. I mean, one of the things, a big challenge that we have toward transit, I mean, and I know you know this as much as anybody, is trying to build more dense communities. And one of the issues is that we need to create, if you take a look at suburbs that are stably integrated, that have a stable, predictable, diverse population and income, these are places that are becoming, without really any help by us pointy-headed planners, becoming much more diverse and valuable. If you look at Oak Park, if you look at Shaker Heights, if you look at places, these are places where the market is transforming the density and the zoning and creating communities that are much more transit-friendly, much more walkable. A lot of times the local planners get in the way of what the market is doing in these places. But if you take a look at racially stable suburbs, they're naturally becoming denser and more complex. And that's a big part of this. You want to think about where people are working. One of the issues, too, is to try to think, I mean, one of the goals of our regional planning system has been to try to cluster retail, office, and rental housing together in nodes. We have 41 nodes in our regional plan, and we try to keep those nodes as dense as we can. And it's hard to keep manufacturing in those nodes, but you're talking about mixed-use offices, medical, retail. You know, retail's being, we live in a world where the internet's changing the retail landscape in ways that are hard to understand. But if you can do that, part of that is making sure these communities are safe and stable and creating nodes that people can bike to and that you can go effectively between one node and another in public transportation. We've done a job study that's coming out soon, and we're finding that in New Jersey and many parts of the country, most of the new entry-level jobs are scattered and non-clustered. And that's a problem for making transit work. You need strong land use planning to keep those jobs as clustered as you can, to try to keep them as close in to the center of the region as you can. But this big swath of disinvestment in these older suburbs is not going to allow for density. The market's not going to produce density in these suburbs that are becoming poorer. That market's not operating very effectively there. And so that's going to be a big problem in trying a regional density plan. If you create a big new wave of disinvested suburbs right in the middle of the region, it's going to be hard to reach the levels of density you need to really optimally use transit and biking.
Hi, well, Neil's a cycling advocate, and I'm a green transit advocate. I've been saying it for a long time, and I think this would really help. We have a lot of the white towns in New Jersey. We are blessed with many old rail rights of way, and these towns develop. We have more, I think, main streets than any other state around train stations. So and also the number 7 city of car-free city in the United States is Paterson, and the number 13 is Elizabeth. So it seems to me like to enable people to move out to those kinds of places, we really have to get serious about providing public transit to the train stations there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is one of the problems of public transit. I mean, if you have, where are the jobs located? Who are the people that are riding transit? How much of it is a pattern of their life? What's their socioeconomic mix? What's the most, I mean, these are questions you're dealing with a lot. I've written a lot about this. But nodes, one of the things you can say without question is nodes are important. You got a lot of beautiful old nodes in New Jersey that look like they're not very alive. They have the infrastructure to be dense, transit-friendly communities, but they don't have much commercial activity. They don't have much private economy. So you've got a lot of beautiful old places. A lot of the Midwest and Northeast does that they were built, they were built as streetcar places 100 years ago, and they're almost perfect. The problem is nobody wants to live in them, or the people that have choices don't want to live in them as much as they did before. And that's partly getting a handle on these larger things. But there's a lot of, I'm a New Jerseyite at least for a while, and I remember all these places and all there's a lot of possibilities here.
Thank you so much. Fascinating presentation. The 2 examples you mentioned of towns that successfully implemented whatever magic you're suggesting here. Mm-hmm. There was one in Kentucky. What were the names of those places again?
Well, there were 16 places that operated what were called metropolitan-wide school integration plans. So these were places that involved all of the cities in the suburbs. And they tended to be in the border state South. So Louisville, Nashville, Knoxville, Raleigh, a lot of places in the border state South. And it was I don't know why it happened in the border state South. I think the border state South was a little bit more progressive on race than the deep South. And I think the business community wanted to get ahead of what was happening in the deep South, so they decided to do these things. Charlotte had a long-term plan. And these were places that became really racially integrated and stably integrated over a long period of time. And these were places where, after the courts ordered these plans in place across whole metropolitan areas, the local elected officials kept them in place. So a lot of places in the border state South. And one of the things they found is that if everybody was involved, all the communities were involved, they stayed very stable over time. And people stayed in the public schools. And one of the things they found is not only did they have very big effects on the achievement gap, but they created tremendous residential stability. So, for example, in Louisville, Kentucky, which is a place I've studied and written about, almost every neighborhood that was racially integrated in 1970 is still integrated today. Almost every neighborhood. Now, in New Jersey, I don't think you probably have 5% of the neighborhoods that were integrated in 1970 are integrated today. But in Louisville, Kentucky, 95% of them are. And that was a very big benefit to those older suburban areas, that they stayed diverse, they stayed economically diverse, that their housing market stayed stable. It's one of the reasons Louisville is a powerful, growing place. where people are moving to. And it's got very good race relations. I mean, they're not. I don't ever want to oversell any of this, but it's a lot better than it is in most parts of the country. There's a lot lower levels of a lot of the common forms of discrimination, but by no means is it a utopia.
And then, in layman's terms, what would it look like? Paint a picture for us. For what would our MPO do next? What would the next steps be?
Well, I mean, the places like Louisville and Raleigh, and Portland, Oregon is another place that is incredibly integrated residentially, except for parts of it that are gentrifying really fast. Portland has done it mostly through a housing program. So Portland adopted a fair share housing plan in their state law, and guess what their courts interpret the Oregon land use planning law with? They use the jurisprudence of New Jersey. So Oregon has a whole land use system courts, and Mount Laurel is a central principle in their jurisprudence. It defines their system of fair housing. The whole thing, they have both 2 or 3 words in the statute, say fair share. The courts in Oregon have used Mount Laurel principles to give guidance to that. And they have in Washington State, too. Washington State does, and Minnesota uses Mount Laurel to interpret its statutory fair share system. And so in Oregon, every municipality truly does provide for its fair share of affordable housing. So in Portland, Oregon, every suburb has affordable housing. Every single one of them does. And they have a certain percentage of high-density rental. And increasingly, they're developing transit-oriented development along suburban nodes. They're being much more effective than we are in Minneapolis at clustering commercial and non-commercial jobs. And they have very integrated schools and very stably integrated schools. Their biggest problem is in the central cities. There's too many white kids in the central cities now. They actually have a gentrification that's so powerful and so fundamental, they may sweep all the poor people out of their central cities into the suburbs. Now that's the only place in the country I've ever seen anything like that, is in Portland, Oregon. They also have an urban growth boundary. They have a lot of good things, and they have a very fine transit agency, and they really have connected land use and transit in a way that almost nobody else has. I think one of the things, in Louisville and Raleigh, these systems are dominated by magnet schools. So in Louisville, there are like 50 or 60 magnet schools in the central cities in what would be the first ring of suburbs, and they're really the best schools in the metropolitan area. And the last 2 lawsuits that came from Seattle, which has a really good system of magnet schools, and Louisville, there's a case called Parents Involved, went to the Supreme Court in 2007. And the plaintiffs in that case, they were both white plaintiffs, but they weren't arguing to go to their neighborhood, mostly white school. They were arguing they'd been denied admission to magnet schools that were half black. They had been denied admission to magnet schools that were science and math magnets in Louisville, and there was an arts magnet in Seattle. These white kids were not arguing that they preferred to go to their neighborhood school, which is much whiter, but they were denied admission to a magnet school that was half black, and that led to places like Caltech and MIT and other parts of the country. And so having these kinds of schools in a very big way is at the center of both Raleigh and Louisville's plan, really fine schools that are operated above and beyond the normal kinds of public schools. And it shows how good they can be when the white families are not suing to go to a white school, they're suing because they've been denied admission, like they've been denied admission to elite private college when they can't go to a school that's half black. That's the kind of America I want to live in. I don't want people to sue on that basis, but that's what I like. So strong, powerful infrastructure of really good schools in the center city run by separate authorities, really powerful and proven good, and affordable housing that really, the Mount Laurel, even though it hasn't been realized in New Jersey, is at the center of every place in the United States. These ideas of fair share animate animate the land use planning acts of 10 states of the country. And they probably had more impact in those other states than they have here in lots of ways.
Any other questions? If there is, we'll take one more before we can proceed. But I don't see any hands up, so we'll close that portion. And I want to thank Professor
for having me.
Orfield for being here with us today.